an original.
From Story Studio Network.
I'm Erin Trafford.
I'm Dave Trafford, and welcome to this episode of Canadian Forestry Can Save the World. And by now, you know, this is the podcast series where we explore the role the forestry industry can and does play in fighting climate change. So we thought, what a great opportunity to sit down and get a State of the Union, a State of the Forestry address from Derek Nighbor. He's the president and CEO of the Forest Products Association of Canada. Derek, let's just start by talking about some of the, I think Erin uses the phrase, or the metaphor of the onion. And every time we start to talk about something in the industry, we peel back a layer and we find that there's something just as sweet and juicy underneath in terms of what's new. And, the first season we did, to me, really laid the foundation for our understanding and where forestry sits in this conversation around climate and climate change and the crisis that we face. Yep. In this series, it's taken it to a whole new dimension for me anyway. I'm going to let Erin speak for herself, but the idea around the innovation that is not just specifically related to forestry, but is driven by forestry and can apply to other industries like mining, like, all the other natural resources where they're struggling to deal with their carbon footprint. How much of a conversation are you having outside the forestry sector about some of the cool stuff that's being driven by the forestry sector to help us move along?
Yeah, it's funny. I just a couple of weeks ago had a meeting with my counterparts at cement and steel and aluminum. A lot of us, we would call ourselves quote unquote heavy industries in Canada, do talk regularly because a lot of us, we're sharing common opportunities and challenges, whether it's on workforce or, operating in rural and northern communities, the carbon agenda. So, I think in a lot of cases, you're going to see the steel and cement and wood sectors competing quite actively in the marketplace, right, in terms of building, but we also all realize that there's enough market share and growing market share for all of us, and an opportunity actually to help each other. I know the cement kilns and the steel factories can use wood waste or biomass to help decarbonize their manufacturing facilities. So although there's competition, there's a fair bit of codependence maybe and a little bit of opportunity to do more together. It's a huge opportunity, I think, here in Canada for our industrial sectors.
I think what I've learned the most through all of this, Derek, is that maybe we can say it's an onion forestry, but for me, immersing ourselves in all of this and learning and sharing these stories with the audience is that fair to say that forestry is almost like the gateway solution. Is like, I actually believe now, I am a believer, we need to start with forestry and all of those other sectors will benefit. And having those conversations and not just looking at everything in silos. Do you feel like that's kind of the next step?
Well, yeah. And listen, we've talked about this before, I know, but the Swedes and the Finns got this a long time ago. They're seeing the opportunity of that integrated value chain and the power of building with wood and the power of using wood residuals to build district heating systems and make biofuels. And I think that's a challenge. I think there's a huge forest sector in the U.S. as well, but like when I think of Canada as a forested nation, I'm thinking more about countries like Sweden, like Finland, like Brazil, like Russia, that have a lot of forests. Now, Russia's not going to be a great collaborator right now for a lot of reasons, but the Swedes and the Finns definitely are, and I think we can learn a lot of lessons from them as well.
So let's go to the lessons, because just in the previous episode, we had a rather, shy offering from Jamie Stephen. I dare say when he talks about this, he talks about it so passionately, and he nails it every time in terms of making it clear to me that we have a lot of work to do, but the work is right in front of us. It's within reach. And he really struck a nerve when he told us, in the last year, the forest fires in this country spit out 3 times the carbon that was coughed up by, exhaust from tailpipes and smokestacks. And that really kind of put it in perspective for me when he talks about the need to forcefully and in a very smart way manage our forests better. This isn't a nice have, it's a must have.
100%. And I think one of the things I've been frustrated, for the federal government, for all of the focus on emissions reductions and climate action, I've been wanting a bit more on the execution side, to be honest. And as the lead voice for the forest sector and forestry workers in Canada, living and working in Ottawa every day, when I saw the government launch its national adaptation strategy, when I saw the government launch its emissions reduction plan, I was like, where's the forestry stuff? Now, to be fair, there was mention of building with wood and tall wood buildings. There was mention of planting trees, and that's important. But those are only 2 parts of the solution. And I think what we'd like to see more in Ottawa, and this is where the Swedes and the Finns get it, is a more integrated, full value chain approach. We're not just a bunch of tree planters and a bunch of home builders. There's a lot of stuff in between there, and I think there's a lot of room for improvement in terms of how we can better integrate the forestry solutions into our climate plans. And I don't think that needs to be a left-right political thing. I think that's something whether you vote left or vote right or somewhere in between, I think we can all rally around that. And I think that's what I want for our sector. I want to see more of our solutions beyond just planting trees being considered as part of our environmental and climate action toolkit.
I also think as you're talking about that, the Finns and the Swedes, I think something else that they've done really well that we can learn from and that we're certainly on the road to doing is taking that message and putting that into the workforce, like the younger people who are now going to school, choosing career paths, is really making it clear that the opportunity in forestry is not just home building and being out in the bush. Like there's so much technology and AI and like really good opportunity to grow the sector from another side while also doing good for the climate. And I'm wondering, like, is that something that you think we need to emphasize more in the coming years, this labor and workforce conversation?
Yeah, I think sticking with lessons learned from Scandinavia, they're talking about this in their schools at a much younger age. The lens through which, I haven't been in grade school in a very, very long time, but I remember it was more the lumberjack kind of, the building of Canada and the voyageurs and the log rollers and those kind of more quintessential Canadian characters. But the benefits and what the forest sector and forestry workers can do for the community, for the environment, I think it is integrated much earlier in the schools. As I talk to my Swedish and Finnish colleagues, and I think we got a lot of groups in Canada trying to do that. Project Learning Tree Canada has a number of modules that they're reaching out through teachers from K to 12 on. I think of more regional groups here in Ontario. Forests Ontario does some great work. I know Earth Rangers does some good stuff as well. But that getting that information in the hands of younger people, not only so that they better understand the world around them, but they start thinking about, it sounds like there might be just as many lab coats as safety vests in the forest sector. And then you see some kids getting out there and touring woodlands operations and seeing the drones that are being used to survey the land and increasingly to help planting trees and that how that technology can help detect fire and keep communities safer. So yeah, there's a lot of really cool technology, I think, that people wouldn't be exposed to unless you had a chance to go visit an operation.
Well, that's an important conversation in terms of igniting that level of curiosity, right? And that's really what it is. And that's the excitement that comes with innovation oftentimes. Now, on the other side, and I'm going to go back to, the policy and political side of this. It feels like it hits a dull thud when we start to talk about this in political circles, because they all nod in affirmative and talk about the need to, deal with the carbon crisis that's in our atmosphere. But right now, the only tool in the toolkit seems to be the carbon tax. And I don't want to argue the merits of the carbon tax one way or the other. It could be one part of it. But it just seems that's the limitation of this discussion. There is no conversation about district heating. There is no conversation about the better and broader uses of biofuel. I just don't. And it's only taken Erin and I, 8 months to figure this out. Surely somebody in Ottawa is paying attention to it.
Yeah, I think when it comes to carbon policy, and listen, full disclosure, our sector and our industry has long supported putting a price on carbon, and as has been really clear, but under some conditions. And unfortunately, a couple of those conditions have not been met. I have a very tough time. And when I'm traveling the country and I'm meeting with forestry workers, contractors, mill workers, I got to look these men and women in the eyeballs, especially on issues like carbon pricing. And I've got to face questions like, why are farmers and fishers able to get a rebate on their fuel charge, and I, as a forestry contractor, am not able to? Well, I don't have a good answer to that question. And that's an absolute shame. And this gets into cherry picking and picking winners and losers and cutting corners and creating exemptions. And when you start doing stuff like that and treating workers on the ground in communities inequitably, it's a hard time you're going to have a hard time keeping the coalition together on this stuff and believing in the power of these policies. We also have a situation where the mills are paying an industrial price on carbon, but the way the federal government rolled that out, you as a mill could be paying $1 million in carbon taxes for industrial emissions, but you may never get that money back. That money may go to a steel manufacturing facility down the street. So there, in execution, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here on this stuff, but I use those two examples to speak to very impractical kind of rollout that kind of is leaving me and many, many other Canadians kind of scratching your head. And when you get exposed to a couple of those commitments that I think aren't followed through in terms of policy development, it's hard to trust the process. So we as the industry voice and the voice of workers in the sector in Canada are going to continue to fight those policy pieces for fairness. But I think the bigger opportunity here is to talk about the solutions that we can bring. And I will dare say it's 2024, it's not 2016 anymore. And although the environment and climate action continues to be very important, we have a very serious economic problem in this country. We have a serious job problem in this country. We have a serious challenge in our rural communities in terms of ensuring that people can provide for their families. And I think through that lens, forestry can deliver in a big way as well. And I just think one of the biggest shifts maybe over the past few years is I think the economic realities of the day are forcing a very different conversation here, and a conversation that's pretty important to have.
That brings to mind when you think about the economics and the rural versus the urban divide, is that forestry by nature is something that supports rural economies because the forest is not necessarily in the city. And this need to innovate at the policy level and at the business model level, right? Like I feel like we're in a little bit of a pressure cooker. Like our onion is there and the story is there, but if I'm reading the tea leaves right, we're running out of time on this. Like we've got to innovate quickly at almost every level, but it starts at that local level with the workers and making sure that they are getting what they need.
Yeah, and pressure cooker is a great word to be using, and it pains me. Somebody who grew up in rural Eastern Ontario, where I know government can be a real force for good. I've long viewed, because of just the renewable and sustainable nature of our sector, where we're located, forestry has had an opportunity to be a critical bridge to rural and northern Canada for our politicians. We check all the boxes in terms of the ability to provide jobs that are absolutely important to these towns where there aren't a lot of other options. Consequently, providing social opportunities. You only need to go to a community where a mill has closed to see that there's no more real hockey rink, the golf club that the leadership at the mill used to help maintain is kind of falling apart. These mills and these jobs are essential to keeping these communities vibrant and to providing opportunity. I'm a product of one of them. I went to school because my dad worked at the corrugated box plant in my hometown. And the environmental benefit. What a wonderful opportunity to connect with rural and northern Ontarians and Canadians on issues related to environmental benefit of this heavy industry. But in overlooking many of the opportunities and the benefits that forestry and forest products can bring, we've missed an opportunity in Canada to make that connection to these rural voters, and a lot of them are pretty fed up right now, and that's painful to see. It's painful to see that division, but if we're not providing economic stability and opportunity for people, people are human. There's this animalistic kind of instinct in terms of if you have a hard time providing for yourself and your family, that's a pretty tough spot to be in. And we need to really revisit. And I don't want to downplay the environmental piece because this goes hand in hand. But I just think the tenor out there in terms of the concern about the economy, the concern about jobs, the need to provide, to provide for families living in these communities, the economic considerations, need to be much more front of mind.
Well, it seems to me, though, you back to the whole idea, like Erin says, we're running out of runway here, to extend the metaphor or beat it up or whatever. But the idea that it's hard, it seems, at a policy or political level to draw the connection between the economics of it and the environment. I don't think it's that hard to draw a solid line between those two dots when you start talking about, the forestry sector in particular in some of these smaller communities.
Yeah, well, and it goes back to the benefits of harvesting a tree. I mean, like this in some circles still continues to be the issue some people just kind of wrap their heads around. This country was built on the understanding that we are going to take care of the land. This land is going to provide for us. It's going to provide social, environmental, recreational opportunities. And in the case of forestry, we're going to manage the land for local values, for conservation values, and we're going to replant. And these trees are going to grow again, and the cycle is going to repeat. But there seems to be a bit of a covenant, I would say, broken here in terms of understanding the circularity of that and the renewability of that, and the fact that we can't just cherry pick values here. This sector is a sector that can deliver in a serious way for the environment, but also the vibrancy and the future of rural and northern Canada depends on it doing well. And in a market where you see in the next 10 years or so, global demand for wood is going up 10%. Global demand for wood chips is going up 40%. By 2030, we're probably going to have another 600-700 million people on this planet. What do you want to build with? How are we going to build up our cities? And I'd rather be providing Canadian wood to do a lot of this stuff than wood from some of these other countries that we're competing with when I think about our track record on human rights and environmental sustainability and whatnot. So, listen, in every challenge, there's an opportunity. And I think we've got an even more heightened one right now here in Canada in this space.
I feel like the message of all of this comes down to we actually have everything we need. We just need to put the puzzle pieces together. Like we don't need to look outside of ourselves, right?
Yeah, we're absolutely blessed, and there's no reason why why at any point we should be importing lumber in from the U.S. But if we don't rally around this renewable resource and provide the certainty for businesses and workers in these communities, we aren't going to have the footprint. And then let's talk about fire. You look at the Australian bushfires in 2019, 2020. A big part of the problem there was the boots were off the ground. No ability, not managing to limit or mitigate the risk. No boots on the ground to be detecting. Last year we lost almost burned 17 million hectares of land. That's 25 times what we would sustainably harvest, replant in an entire year. 25 times the land base was affected by fire last year. And those fires are going to get worse. So there's not only the environmental imperative, the social imperative, the economic opportunity, but in a worsening, more catastrophic fire type environment, we need forest management more than ever, and we need those boots on the ground.
So let's not get too far down the road here in terms of it being a dire situation, because there were a number of things we came across over the last year. I would hazard to say, against everything we've said so far, are really positive, not the least of which is, the legislation that was presented to make sure that public buildings have a certain amount of wood when we're procuring, business to do that construction infrastructure. And that's no small thing. I mean, the fall economic statement, for example, included incentives for the manufacture of biofuels. That's all good. I mean, to the extent where it, in effect, is putting a value on carbon, if you will. It seems to me slowly that there are certain things that are percolating to the top here that I know in your world is, geez, we've been talking about this for a long time, but it's an overnight success now in many respects in the hallways of government. So I'm getting a sense that some of this is breaking through, that people are hearing it and it's being applied broadly. And the conversation around mass timber, really good example. People are just coming around to it. The folks, the architects, the designers, all the construction folks, the people in the wood product business know it's been talked about and being developed for the last, couple of decades. But now we're starting to see it institutionally applied in places, university campuses in British Columbia and here in Toronto. And it's working its way into the lexicon of the general public. I think that's a major breakthrough.
Yeah, the mass timber piece has been significant, and listen, with more experience and more time, you're going to build, supply chains are going to grow and capacity is going to grow and new ideas are going to come forward. So, and also we, talk about that rural urban divide. What a wonderful way to connect with an urban audience than plopping up a massive timber tower in downtown Toronto or Vancouver. You know what I mean? Like, you talk to any MP in those communities who've seen that. These are beautiful, stunning buildings. And you mentioned, Dave, the investment tax credits for biomass for heat and electricity generation. That's positive, and that's an important signal. Not only to the industry here in Canada, but to international investors. This is not an old school domestic economy. This is a very, very international and highly competitive industry where we're needing to compete with incentives in the US and the EU and other markets. So those measures like the investment tax credits are absolutely critical if we're going to keep our heads above water here and compete with competing nations.
What's next then? I mean, we started off by talking about some of the frustrations around government policy. We're seeing glimmers of hope around that. What needs to be done to literally and figuratively ignite this conversation so that it is productive, and we move forward in a smart way around forest management, around the new technology, all these things that we've discovered?
Yeah, I think on the innovation side of things, I think we just got to, our companies and our workers got to keep doing what they're doing. I think we're seeing a lot of innovation. We're seeing a lot of ingenuity here in Canada, and we're seeing a lot of new markets being developed. I think, for our companies and our workers, I think, keep doing what you're doing, keep investing in these new ways of doing things and in new technologies. I think there's a lot of promise there for our sector in that regard. I think for us, listen, we live in the real world in the sector. Federal government is very important, and we're probably going to have an election next year. So ensuring that all parties are aware of the benefits and the opportunities that forestry can bring, both environmental and on the economic side, I think is absolutely critical. The other thing too, my other wish is for Canadians to be louder and prouder about this sector. It's really interesting. We do polling fairly regularly, and the polling that Abacus Data had done back in it was just in February was that 50% of Canadians thought forestry was very good or good. Like, there was, in terms of the supporters who had, I think that it was positive or very positive was 50%. Those who thought it was negative or very negative was 9%. And then the rest in the middle were unsure about having an opinion. So when 50% of people are with you or really with you, and 9% of the people are against you or really against you, those are pretty strong numbers. And I don't know if that's truly understood by a lot of decision makers. And that's not something we in the industry take lightly. That we need to continue to talk to Canadians about our story and what our people are doing on the ground and why it matters to them. And I think that's the other piece is just we in the sector need to stop just talking to ourselves. A lot of our foresters and biologists are quite comfortable. They chose a career in the bush because they kind of like to be in nature and not around people. Let's be honest. But the opportunity to tell our story more broadly to other audiences, maybe audiences that we're not used to talking to, I think is absolutely critical as well.
I think I speak for our entire team when I say thank you for letting us be part of that mission, because we have learned a lot working on this podcast with you guys. And I mean, I want to say bought the hat, bought the t-shirt. Yeah. Like I'm right there with you. I think part of this is really the storytelling, because as soon as you start telling people about the cool stuff happening in forestry, everyone just lights right up. So I think we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and the other piece, the affordable housing piece, which has been an issue for a long time, but really just came into profile in the last year or so. It's kind of shocking. Just overnight, it was all affordable housing all the time, or accessible housing. And again, this is an area where we have a huge opportunity close to home to provide a sustainable, renewable resource to help address this growing problem, so that more people can get into homes. And it's I just think and the demands are going to, our cities are getting bigger. We need the infrastructure, and we've got this tremendous material in a tremendous bounty here in Canada that we can use to solve some of these problems. So the housing piece is another one I didn't want to leave.
Well, and it's not just the wood, right? I mean, when we talk to folks about the technology behind mass timber and how quickly it can be assembled, and we can do a lot of the work off site, and it's safer and it's more productive. So it's not just about providing the house. We've got the tech that could actually create housing or serve housing needs in areas of this country where right now it's really hard to do in a conventional way. Forestry and wood product and the innovation that goes with it solves a lot of that problem.
And faster, right?
Exactly.
The speed with which forestry can move is faster than almost any other industry when it comes to this particular problem.
Yeah, and not to forget the wood fiber-based insulation that could go into that building, the leftover wood chips or the biomass that could be used to heat that building. And this is the beauty of that project in Nova Scotia is in terms of in terms of district heating opportunity, close to home solutions for local communities. And you're not just seeing that there. Downtown Prince George has a great little district heating system. We're seeing more of them popping up in the territories. It's another trend, and again, Scandinavia. You look at downtown Stockholm. It's a pretty incredible setup there.
Well, against all of that backdrop, we'd be remiss if we didn't sort of at least acknowledge that COP28 finished on a historic note. It didn't solve all the issues, but for the first time ever, it recognized that we must transition away from fossil fuel. And underlying all of that is the opportunity that you've discussed, biofuels, the forestry industry. There is a definite role here for the forestry industry to take a leading role.
Yeah, and at those same climate meetings in Dubai, the Canadian government and its another dozen or so nations signed up a pledge around the use of wood and wood solution in terms of contributing to that. So it was an important COP this year, or back in November, December, and those signals I think are very, very positive, and I would say more pronounced than they might have been at previous COPs in terms of not only the fossil fuel related commitment, but also the substitution piece. What are the materials we can turn to, and wood was front and center.
Yeah. Well, I'd be curious to see if any of this works its way into the narrative in the next Alberta election, because really interesting things going on there. They've got an incredibly robust forestry sector in Alberta, one, but two, we start where we finish where we started. Jamie Stephen pointing out Alberta is the optimum place in the world for the BECCS plants. That is, they have the geology that can best store carbon underground. So it will be curious to hear if, who the new NDP leader is up against the premier and that conversation. I know they talk a lot about it, but the idea, Derek, that the oil patch could be the driving force to help this country, maybe others, transition away from the fossil fuel economy, that would be epic.
It's a saga. It's like
right?
An amazing twist in this story.
Yeah, the BECCS opportunity, but also we're and this is publicly announced, Mondi, which is a global forestry company based in Austria, operations in some 30 countries around the world. They just purchased a mill in Hinton, Alberta. And they've been very public about their plans of investing, $400 to $600 million in that mill with a new paper facility and whatnot. That would be the biggest investment in our sector in more than a generation in terms of that potential investment or that pledged investment in Hinton, Alberta. That's tremendous news for that community and for the province. So yeah, listen, a lot of innovation, a lot of new technology deployment happening everywhere. That the BECCS or biogenic carbon capture and storage is part of it, but other parts of it are just, mill innovations, decarbonization of the lime kilns, so a lot of investment and opportunity in those spaces as well.
Well, I know your title is President CEO at FPAC, but really it's probably President CEO on the side of the Angels. I mean,
well, maybe chief cheerleader, right? I feel I laugh at I'm very, very passionate about this industry, partially because I grew up in Pembroke, Ontario, home of the Lumber Kings. That's our junior hockey team, right? My grandpa and my dad worked at the mill in town, and I just see how important those jobs are to communities like the one I grew up in. And I also see some of the misinformation that can get out there about what the forest sector is or is not doing. And I feel I have an obligation in my role to speak for those families like the one I grew up in. And I do that with a great deal of pride.
Well, Derek, thanks for being here and all the good work you do. And just as a tease to sort of build on some of the stuff that we've been talking about, Erin and I learned a whole lot that hasn't yet fit into the podcast series. We've come up with about 7 or 8 really fun and cool facts that now you probably know all of we're going to talk about in terms of the uses of wood, but stuff that just blew us right off of our chair. We've got this far so far in terms of the uses and the applications of wood product. I guarantee you there's going to be people who's going to be, what? It's really some cool stuff we found.
We have like the Jeopardy music
That's
teed
right.
up for the next episode because we're going into fun fact mode, stuff you didn't know, dinner party,
That's right.
Back pocket conversation starters.
Stuff you'll want to include. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to ruin the surprise, but I think when I started the job, the 2 that surprised me were ice cream and lipstick. If you need some reference points on those, I don't disclose if those are on your list or not, but those were the 2 that I was kind of shocked by when I started at FPAC 8 years ago.
Yeah, and it's the really question that it promotes, right? Derek, thanks for being here. It's always good to talk to you.
Yeah, nice to see you both. Thanks a lot.
All right, that will do it for us. Yes, we are really looking forward to our fun facts episode coming up, so you won't want to miss that. For our producers, Becky Coles and Jen Hudson, our technical producer and audio editor, Mike Trutler, for Erin and the whole team at Story Studio Network, thanks for listening. This podcast series is produced for Forestry for the Future. And for more information, I'd encourage you to visit the website forestryforthefuture.ca. And you may want to get involved in supporting a sector that's committed to growing a greener economy and driving our country towards a net zero carbon future for you and your kids. I'm Dave Trafford, and Canadian Forestry Can Save the World is produced by Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.